Detective Lisa Chen glanced at her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. She was already running 15 minutes late, and the morning traffic wasn't doing her any favors. Today was supposed to be one of the most important days of her career, and here she was, stuck behind a delivery truck that seemed determined to stop at every possible intersection. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the courthouse administrator asking where she was. Lisa pressed down on the accelerator just a bit more, her mind racing through everything she needed to do once she arrived. The orientation was supposed to start at 9 sharp, and being late on her first official day wasn't exactly the impression she wanted to make. The intersection ahead showed a yellow light. Lisa knew she could make it. She'd been driving these streets for over a decade as a detective, knew every traffic pattern, every timing of every light. She accelerated smoothly through the intersection just as the light turned red. Or at least that's what the officer behind her would later claim. The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror made her heart sink. "You've got to be kidding me," she thought. Of all the days, of all the times, this had to happen now. She pulled over to the side of the road, her hands already reaching for her badge and license. This would just take a minute, she told herself. Show her credentials, explain the situation, and be on her way. Officer Derek Hayes stepped out of his patrol car with the kind of swagger that came from years of routine traffic stops. He'd already decided this was going to be a citation before he even reached the window. Drivers who thought they owned the road needed to be taught a lesson, and this woman in her expensive sedan definitely fit that category. Lisa rolled down her window, already holding out her police detective badge alongside her driver's license. "Officer, I'm Detective Chen with the Metro Police Department. I'm actually heading to an urgent meeting at the courthouse right now. I understand I may have cut that light close, but I really need to get going." Hayes barely glanced at the badge before a smirk crossed his face. "Detective, huh? Let me see that badge again." He took it from her hand, examining it like he was inspecting a counterfeit bill. "You know, we get a lot of people with fake badges trying to get out of tickets." Lisa felt her jaw tighten. "Officer, you can call it in. My badge number is right there. I'm not trying to get out of anything, I'm just explaining that I have an extremely important meeting that I'm already late for." "Everyone's got somewhere important to be," Hayes said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But that doesn't give you the right to run red lights. You female detectives think you can just flash a badge and speed through the city?" The comment hung in the air like a slap. Lisa took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay professional. She'd dealt with difficult people her entire career. This was just another test of patience. "Officer Hayes," she said, reading his name tag. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm simply stating a fact. I'm a police officer. I'm late for official business, and that light was yellow when I entered the intersection." Hayes let out a short laugh. "Well, from where I was sitting, it was definitely red. And you know what? I think I'm going to need to write you up for this. Can't have cops thinking they're above the law, right?" He walked back to his patrol car, taking his time, making a show of running her information through the system. Lisa sat in her car watching the minutes tick by on her dashboard clock. She was now 25 minutes late. Her phone kept buzzing with increasingly concerned messages. She wanted to respond, to explain, but she knew better than to start texting while an officer was writing her a citation. That would just give him another reason to extend this encounter. When Hayes finally returned, he had a ticket book in hand and that same infuriating smirk on his face. "Well, Detective Chen, everything checks out. You are who you say you are. But that doesn't change the fact that you ran a red light." He began writing, taking his time with each letter, each number. "Officer, I've been nothing but respectful to you," Lisa said, her voice steady but firm. "I showed you my credentials. I explained my situation. Is there a reason you're being so dismissive?" Hayes looked up from his ticket book. "Dismissive? I'm just doing my job, detective. Maybe if you spent more time focusing on following traffic laws instead of whatever important meeting you've got, you wouldn't be in this situation." He tore the ticket from his book with an exaggerated flourish and handed it to her. "Here you go. You can contest it in court if you think I'm wrong. Though I'd suggest you learn to follow the rules like everyone else. You know, set a good example and all that." Lisa took the ticket, her hand steady even though anger was bubbling just beneath the surface. She'd been a detective for 8 years. She'd worked gang cases, homicide investigations, fraud rings. She'd testified in court dozens of times. And never, not once, had she been treated with such blatant disrespect by a fellow officer. "I'll see you in court then, Officer Hayes," she said quietly. "Looking forward to it," Hayes replied, already walking back to his car. As Lisa pulled back into traffic. Now 40 minutes late, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with that entire encounter. It wasn't just about the ticket. She'd received tickets before in her personal vehicle. It was the way Hayes had spoken to her, the way he'd questioned her badge, the specific comment about female detectives. It felt personal in a way that went beyond routine law enforcement. When she finally arrived at the courthouse, flustered and apologetic, she rushed through the halls toward the administrative office. The orientation she'd been so worried about missing had been rescheduled due to a last-minute emergency anyway. The irony wasn't lost on her. All that stress, all that confrontation with Officer Hayes and the meeting had been moved regardless. But as Lisa sat through the rescheduled orientation later that afternoon, her mind kept drifting back to that traffic stop. Something about Hayes's behavior nagged at her. The way he'd targeted her, the way he'd spoken about female detectives specifically, the obvious pleasure he'd taken in making her late. It wasn't the behavior of a professional officer doing his duty. It was something else entirely. That evening, Lisa sat at her kitchen table with the citation in front of her. She could just pay it and move on. It would be easier. But easy wasn't always right. And something told her that if Officer Hayes had treated her this way, a fellow law enforcement officer, how might he be treating regular citizens, especially women who didn't have badges to show, who didn't know their rights, who might be intimidated into accepting whatever Hayes told them? Lisa opened her laptop and began typing. Not a complaint, not yet. Just notes. Times, dates, specific quotes from their conversation. She'd learned long ago that details mattered, that patterns often revealed themselves when you paid attention to the small things. And if her gut was right about Officer Hayes, this traffic stop might be just the beginning of a much bigger story. She had 30 days to decide whether to contest the ticket in court. 30 days to figure out if her instincts were correct or if she was just letting her anger at being treated poorly cloud her judgment. But one way or another, Lisa was going to get to the bottom of this. Because if there was one thing she'd learned in her years as a detective, it was that people who abused their power rarely did it just once. Lisa spent the next few days trying to focus on her regular work. But the encounter with Officer Hayes kept creeping back into her thoughts. Every time she sat down at her desk, she found herself pulling up that citation, reading through the details again. Something about the whole situation just didn't sit right with her. On Thursday morning, she made a decision. During her lunch break, she drove down to the records department at the police headquarters. Her friend Kelly worked there, someone she'd known since her academy days. If anyone could help her dig into this quietly, it would be Kelly. "Hey, stranger," Kelly said, looking up from her computer screen. "What brings you down here?" "Don't tell me you're working another cold case that needs files from the 80s. Lisa pulled up a chair and sat down, keeping her voice low. "Actually, I need a favor, and I need it to stay between us for now." Kelly's expression shifted from friendly to curious. "Okay, now you've got my attention. What's going on?" "I got pulled over last week by an officer named Derek Hayes. Traffic citation. But the whole thing felt off, Kelly. The way he spoke to me, the comments he made about female detectives. I just want to see if there's any history there. Any complaints, any patterns." Kelly typed the name into her system, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "Hayes Derek, Metro Patrol Division. Been on the force for about 6 years." She scrolled through the screen, her eyes scanning the information. "Huh, that's interesting." "What?" Lisa leaned forward. "He's got complaints. Quite a few, actually. Most of them are from women." Kelly clicked through several files. "Look at this. Attorney filed a complaint 2 years ago. Doctor filed one 18 months ago. business consultant last year. And there are more. At least 8 formal complaints in the past 3 years. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. What happened with those complaints? Kelly kept reading, her frown deepening. Looks like they all got reviewed by his supervisor and dismissed. Reasons vary. Officer was performing his duties within guidelines. Insufficient evidence of misconduct. Complaint appears motivated by desire to avoid citation. Same pattern over and over. Can you print those for me? Lisa, are you sure about this? If Hayes finds out you're looking into him, especially since you've got an active citation from him, it could look like retaliation or bias. I know, Lisa said. But if this guy is targeting women, especially professional women who might challenge his authority, then someone needs to look into it properly, and right now I might be the only one who will. Kelly hesitated for a moment, then hit the print button. Just be careful, okay? These things have a way of getting complicated fast. Over the next 2 weeks, Lisa dedicated every spare moment to investigating Officer Hayes. She started by reaching out to the women who had filed complaints, being careful to identify herself as a detective conducting a routine follow-up investigation. Most were hesitant to talk at first, having already gone through the complaint process once with no results. But Dr. Michelle Park agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. Michelle was a surgeon at City General Hospital, someone who clearly didn't have time for nonsense. She arrived in scrubs, having come straight from a morning surgery. I appreciate you meeting with me, Dr. Park, Lisa said as they sat down with their coffees. Call me Michelle, and honestly, I'm surprised anyone is taking this seriously. When I filed my complaint, I felt like I was the one being investigated, not Officer Hayes. Tell me what happened. Michelle took a sip of her coffee, her expression darkening at the memory. It was about 6 in the morning. I was heading to the hospital for an emergency surgery. A child had been in a car accident, and I was the on-call pediatric surgeon. I was driving fast, I'll admit it, but I had my hospital credentials displayed, and I was using my hazard lights to indicate an emergency. And Hayes pulled you over? He did. And when I explained the situation, showed him my hospital ID, explained that a child's life was literally depending on me getting to that operating room, he laughed. Actually laughed. He said something like, "Every doctor thinks their time is more important than everyone else's." He took his time writing that ticket too. Made me wait almost 20 minutes while that child was in the emergency room. Lisa felt anger rising in her chest. What happened to the child? She survived, thank God, but it was close. And when I filed the complaint, Hayes' supervisor told me that I should have called an ambulance for myself if it was truly an emergency. Can you believe that? Like I'm supposed to have a police escort every time there's a surgery. Lisa talked to 3 more women over the following days. Each story was similar. Professional women, usually driving nice cars, usually during morning rush hour. Hayes would pull them over for minor infractions, sometimes questionable ones, and then he'd make condescending comments, take his time with the citation, and seem to enjoy making them late for wherever they were going. One woman, a lawyer named Jennifer, had even installed a dash cam after her encounter with Hayes. She still had the footage. I kept it because something told me this wasn't over, Jennifer said, pulling up the video on her laptop. Watch this. The video showed Hayes approaching Jennifer's car after pulling her over. Even through the camera, his attitude was clear. The way he leaned on her car window, the smirk on his face when she explained she was heading to court for a case. He'd made her miss her hearing that morning, and the judge had not been understanding about her excuse. Can you send me a copy of that footage? Lisa asked. Absolutely. And if you're building a case against this guy, count me in to testify. He's been getting away with this for too long. By the 3rd week, Lisa had compiled a folder that was getting thicker by the day. Complaint records, witness statements, dash cam footage from 2 different women, and her own detailed account of her encounter with Hayes. The pattern was undeniable. Hayes wasn't just a difficult officer. He was specifically targeting professional women, particularly those who might challenge his authority or who appeared to be successful. Lisa sat in her apartment one evening, the folder spread out on her coffee table. She knew what she had here was solid, but she also knew the complications. She was one of Hayes' citation recipients. Any case she built against him would be scrutinized for bias. Defense attorneys would argue she was motivated by her own ticket, trying to discredit an officer who had legitimately caught her running a red light. Her phone rang. It was her mentor, Captain Rodriguez, calling to check in on her transition to her new position. She'd been so focused on the Hayes investigation that she'd almost forgotten about the other major change happening in her life. "How are you feeling about everything?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Big changes coming up. Honestly, Captain, I've been distracted. I've stumbled onto something that needs attention, but the timing is complicated. Want to talk about it?" Lisa explained the situation, laying out everything she'd discovered about Officer Hayes. She told him about the complaints, the pattern, the women she'd interviewed. Captain Rodriguez listened without interrupting, the way he always did when she was working through a complex problem. "Here's what I think," he said finally. "What you've uncovered matters. Those women deserve to have their complaints taken seriously. But you're right about the optics. You can't be the one to file this formally, not with your own citation pending. So what do I do? Just let it go? No, you document everything just like you've been doing. And when the time is right, when you're in a position where no one can question your motives, you make sure this gets to the right people. Sometimes the best investigations require patience." After hanging up, Lisa looked at her calendar. Her court date was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks until she'd have to face Officer Hayes again, this time in front of a judge. And something told her that courtroom was going to be very different from what Hayes was expecting. She added another page to her folder. A timeline, a list of questions she wanted answered, and a growing certainty that this traffic stop, as frustrating as it had been, might be the thing that finally brought accountability to an officer who had been abusing his badge for far too long. Lisa closed the folder and placed it carefully in her desk drawer. In 3 weeks, she'd have her day in court, and Officer Hayes would have no idea what was coming. The morning of the court date arrived with gray skies and a hint of rain in the air. Lisa stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her blazer for the 3rd time. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, professional but not overly formal. She wanted to look like someone who took the proceedings seriously, not someone trying to intimidate with authority. Her folder sat on the kitchen counter, packed with all the evidence she'd gathered over the past 3 weeks. She'd debated whether to bring it with her. Technically, this was just a simple traffic citation hearing, but something told her to be prepared for anything. She slipped the folder into her briefcase alongside her own case files. The municipal courthouse was already busy when she arrived at 8:30. People filled the hallways, some in suits, others in casual clothes, all waiting for their cases to be called. Lisa found a seat in the back of the courtroom and watched as the early morning cases proceeded. Parking violations, speeding tickets, a few more serious traffic offenses. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided over each case with practiced efficiency, her voice calm and measured. Lisa glanced around the courtroom and spotted Officer Hayes near the front, sitting with 2 other patrol officers. He looked relaxed, confident even, laughing at something one of his colleagues had said. He hadn't noticed her yet, which was fine with Lisa. She was content to observe for now. Her phone buzzed quietly in her pocket. A text message from the courthouse administrator. Judge Hendricks running late. Some delays expected this morning. Lisa settled back in her seat. Court delays were nothing new. She'd spent enough time testifying in criminal cases to know that schedules were more like suggestions than actual plans. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. The bailiff kept stepping out of the courtroom to make phone calls, returning each time with an increasingly worried expression. The court clerk whispered to the prosecutor, who then whispered to several attorneys waiting for their cases. Something was happening, but no one was saying what. Finally, around 9:45, the bailiff stood and addressed the crowded courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to inform you that Judge Hendricks has experienced a medical emergency this morning and has been transported to the hospital. We're working to determine how to proceed with today's docket. Please remain in the courtroom while we sort this out." The room erupted in concerned murmurs. People started checking their phones, calculating whether they'd need to take another day off work for a rescheduled hearing. Lisa felt a knot form in her stomach. She hoped Judge Hendricks was all right. They'd met briefly during orientation, and the woman had struck her as kind and fair-minded. The bailiff and court clerk huddled together, making frantic phone calls. Lisa could see the stress on their faces, a full docket of cases and no judge to hear them. This was going to be a logistical nightmare. Officer Hayes stood up and stretched, clearly annoyed by the delay. He checked his watch and said something to his colleagues that made them laugh. Lisa wondered how many other cases he had scheduled for today. How many other our people were waiting to challenge his citations. The court clerk suddenly looked up from her phone, her eyes scanning the courtroom. She seemed to be looking for someone specific. Then her gaze landed on Lisa, and her expression changed from stressed to relieved. She quickly walked over to the bailiff and whispered something urgent in his ear. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up, and he immediately looked in Lisa's direction. Lisa felt her heart rate pick up. What was happening? The bailiff approached her seat, speaking quietly. "Ma'am, are you Lisa Chen?" "Yes, I am. Could you please come with me for a moment? The clerk needs to speak with you." Lisa stood, aware that several people in the courtroom were now watching. She followed the bailiff to the front, where the court clerk was waiting with what looked like a schedule in her hand. "Detective Chen, I apologize for the confusion this morning," the clerk said, keeping her voice low. "I didn't realize you were here as a defendant. I thought you were here for your orientation." Lisa blinked. "My orientation?" "Yes. You're scheduled to shadow Judge Hendricks this morning before taking over the afternoon docket. That was the urgent meeting you were trying to get to 3 weeks ago, correct? We had to reschedule it because of a conflict, and then we moved it to today." The words hit Lisa like a physical force. Her orientation, her judicial orientation, in all the chaos and stress of dealing with Officer Hayes in her investigation, she'd completely forgotten to check her updated calendar. The meeting she'd been rushing to that morning when Hayes pulled her over wasn't just any courthouse meeting. It was the beginning of her transition from detective to municipal court judge. "I completely forgot," Lisa admitted. "With everything that's been going on, I lost track of the date." The clerk's expression softened. "Understandable. This has been a chaotic few weeks for everyone. But here's our situation. We have a full docket, no judge. And you're technically certified to begin hearing cases as of this morning. Judge Hendricks completed all your paperwork before her emergency. Would you be willing to take over the docket?" Lisa's mind raced. She looked back at the crowded courtroom, at all the people waiting for their cases to be heard. Then her eyes landed on Officer Hayes, still standing near the front, oblivious to the conversation happening 20 feet away from him. "There's a complication," Lisa said carefully. "I'm here because I have a case on the docket. Officer Hayes issued me a citation 3 weeks ago. I can't preside over my own case." "Of course not," the clerk agreed. "We'd have to recuse you from that specific case and have it transferred to another judge. But you could handle the rest of the docket. We've got about 30 cases scheduled for this morning." Lisa looked at the schedule the clerk was holding. Sure enough, there were multiple cases involving Officer Hayes. Different defendants, different citations, all issued around the same time as hers. Some of them might be the women she'd interviewed, or others facing the same pattern of questionable traffic stops. "Give me a moment to think," Lisa said. She walked to the back of the courtroom, her mind working through the implications. If she took the bench today, she couldn't hear her own case, but she would hear the others. She would see Officer Hayes testify multiple times. She would have the authority to question him, to examine the evidence to determine whether his citations were valid or not. But there was another consideration. Hayes had no idea who she really was. He dismissed her as just another detective trying to use her badge to get out of a ticket. He had no clue that in a few minutes she might be the judge presiding over his cases. The look on his face when he realized would be something to see, but that wasn't why she was considering this. She was considering it because those other defendants deserved a fair hearing. They deserved a judge who understood what it felt like to be on the receiving end of Hayes's condescending attitude. A judge who had taken the time to investigate and understand the pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. Lisa walked back to the clerk.
"I'll do it.
But I want to be clear that my case with Officer Hayes needs to be handled by another judge. No exceptions, no questions about impartiality." "Absolutely," the clerk said, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Your Honor." The words sounded strange to Lisa's ears. Your Honor. She'd been called Detective Chen for so long that the new title felt like it belonged to someone else. But as the clerk handed her the docket and the bailiff prepared to make the announcement, Lisa realized this was real. This was happening. The bailiff stepped to the center of the courtroom and raised his voice. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Lisa Chen presiding. The courtroom fell silent. People stood slowly, confused by the sudden announcement. And then, As Lisa walked from the back of the courtroom toward the judge's bench, she watched Officer Hayes' face transform from boredom to confusion to absolute shock. He recognized her immediately. The detective he'd pulled over, the woman he'd talked down to and dismissed, the person he'd smugly told to learn to follow the rules. And now she was walking past him in a judge's robe, about to take the seat that would give her authority over every case he'd brought to court that day. Lisa climbed the steps to the bench and sat down, her heart pounding but her face calm. She looked out at the courtroom at all the faces watching her, waiting to see what would happen next. Her eyes briefly met Hayes's, and in that moment, she saw him realize the magnitude of his mistake. "Good morning," Lisa said, her voice steady and clear. "I apologize for the delay. Let's proceed with today's docket." The courtroom remained standing, the silence thick and heavy. Lisa took a moment to arrange the files in front of her, letting the weight of the moment settle. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, but none more intense than Officer Hayes' stare. He looked like someone who'd just watched the ground disappear from under his feet. "Please be seated," Lisa said, and the sound of people settling back into the wooden benches echoed through the room. She glanced at the clerk. "Before we begin with the scheduled docket, I need to address a conflict of interest. Case number 2847, Chen versus the city, involves a citation issued to me by Officer Hayes. That case will be reassigned to another judge and rescheduled. The clerk will provide details to the parties involved after today's session." Officer Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his seat. One of his fellow officers leaned over and whispered something to him, but Hayes just shook his head, his jaw tight. Lisa looked down at the docket. The first case was a parking violation, nothing involving Hayes. She handled it quickly and fairly, finding in favor of the city. The defendant had parked in a fire lane with clear signage, and the photographic evidence was undeniable. It was a straightforward case, and it helped her settle into the rhythm of the bench. The second case was also simple, a speeding ticket with radar evidence. Lisa asked a few questions, reviewed the calibration records for the radar gun, and issued her ruling. She could feel herself finding her footing, her years of courtroom experience as a detective translating surprisingly well to this side of the bench. Then the clerk called the third case. Case number 2851, Martinez versus the city. A woman in her mid-30s approached the defendant's table. Lisa recognized her immediately from her investigation. This was one of the women who had filed a complaint against Hayes. The woman's lawyer, a young public defender, stood beside her looking slightly nervous. Officer Hayes walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat down. He avoided looking directly at Lisa. His confidence from earlier completely evaporated. The prosecutor, a tired-looking man with a stack of files, began his questioning. "Officer Hayes, please describe the events that led to this citation." Hayes cleared his throat. "On August 15th at approximately 7:45 in the morning, I observed the defendant's vehicle traveling at a high rate of speed on Morrison Boulevard. I paced her vehicle at 53 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. And what happened when you initiated the traffic stop?" The defendant pulled over. "I approached the vehicle, informed her of the violation, and issued a citation for excessive speed." It was a textbook testimony, exactly what you'd expect from an officer who'd done this hundreds of times, but Lisa noticed something. Hayes was giving the bare minimum of information, none of the details or color commentary he'd included in other reports she'd read. The public defender stood up for cross-examination. "Officer Hayes, did Ms. Martinez say anything to you when you pulled her over?" "She said she was late for work." "Did she explain where she worked?" Hayes hesitated. "She mentioned something about a hospital." "Something about a hospital," the defender repeated. "According to my client, she specifically told you she was a nurse heading to her shift at City General, and that she was running late because her child had been sick that morning. Do you recall that conversation?" "I may have heard something about that, yes." Lisa leaned forward slightly. "Officer Hayes, did you document this information in your report?" Hayes finally looked at her, and she could see the discomfort in his eyes. "Oh, Your Honor, I documented the traffic violation and the defendant's basic information." "Why didn't you include her explanation for why she was speeding?" "It's not standard procedure to include every excuse a driver gives, Your Honor." Lisa let that answer hang in the air for a moment. "But you do include relevant context in your reports, correct?" If a driver appears impaired, you note that. If they're hostile, you note that. A nurse rushing to work at a hospital seems like relevant context. I suppose I could have included it, Hayes admitted. The public defender pulled out a document. Your Honor, I have Ms. Martinez's work schedule from City General Hospital showing that she was indeed scheduled to start her shift at 8 o'clock that morning. I also have a statement from her supervisor indicating that she called ahead that morning to explain she was running a few minutes late due to a family emergency. Lisa reviewed the documents. Everything checked out. She turned her attention back to Hayes. Officer Hayes, how long did the traffic stop take? I'm not sure exactly. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And during that time, did Ms. Martinez remain cooperative? Yes, Your Honor. Did she show you her nursing credentials? Hayes shifted in his seat. I don't recall. Lisa looked at the case file. According to your report, you asked her for license, registration, and insurance. Nothing else. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. The picture was becoming clearer. Lisa could see it, and she was certain the people in the courtroom could see it too. A nurse, running late because of a sick child, trying to get to the hospital where people depended on her. And Hayes had taken his time processing a citation without considering the context or the consequences. Lisa asked a few more questions, then reviewed the evidence. The speed violation itself wasn't in dispute. Ms. Martinez admitted she'd been going over the limit. But Lisa also considered the circumstances, the lack of any safety risk on a straight road with minimal traffic at that hour, and the fact that Hayes had essentially made a difficult morning worse for someone trying to help others. I'm going to reduce this citation to a warning, Lisa announced. Ms. Martinez, you were speeding, and that's not acceptable regardless of the circumstances. However, I find that the context of your situation, your clean driving record, and your occupation as a healthcare worker warrant leniency in this case. Please be more mindful of your speed in the future, even in stressful situations. Relief washed over Ms. Martinez's face. Thank you, Your Honor. As she left the courtroom, Lisa could feel the tension in the room shift. Officer Hayes looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The next case was called. Another one of Hayes's citations. Then another. As the morning progressed, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Every single case involving Officer Hayes had irregularities. Missing information in reports, inconsistencies in testimony, failures to document relevant context, and every single defendant was a woman. In one case, Hayes had cited a teacher who claimed she'd stopped at a stop sign, but he said she'd rolled through it. The problem was a nearby business had security camera footage that clearly showed the teacher's car coming to a complete stop. Hayes had been positioned in a spot where his view would have been partially obstructed by a tree. Officer Hayes, Lisa said after reviewing the footage. How certain were you that the defendant failed to stop? I was certain at the time, Your Honor. But the video evidence contradicts your observation. Hayes had no good answer. The video appears to show a stop, yes. It doesn't appear to show a stop, officer. It clearly shows a stop, which means either your position wasn't ideal for observing this particular intersection, or you made an error in judgment. Which is it? Perhaps my position wasn't ideal, Hayes admitted quietly. Lisa dismissed that citation entirely. The evidence was clear, and Hayes's testimony was unreliable. By the lunch recess, Lisa had reviewed 8 of Hayes's cases. She'd dismissed 3 entirely, reduced 2 to warnings, and upheld only 3 with modifications. The pattern was damning, and everyone in the courtroom could see it. During the break, Lisa sat in the judge's chambers reviewing her notes. The clerk brought her a sandwich she barely touched. She was thinking about the women she'd interviewed, the complaints that had been dismissed, the years this had been going on. And now from the bench she could see it all laid out in black and white. There was a knock on the door. The bailiff entered. Your Honor, Officer Hayes has requested a brief recess to consult with his supervisor. His lieutenant is here and would like to speak with you if possible. Lisa considered this. Tell them I'll meet with the lieutenant after court concludes for the day. The docket will resume as scheduled in 15 minutes. As the afternoon session began, Lisa noticed that Hayes looked even more uncomfortable than before. His lieutenant sat in the gallery taking notes on everything. The prosecutor seemed more cautious in his questioning, and Hayes's answers became even more minimal than before. 3 more cases. 3 more examples of questionable citations, incomplete reports, and testimony that didn't quite hold up under scrutiny. By the time Lisa adjourned court at 4 o'clock, she had heard 11 of Hayes's cases. Only 4 had survived her review without significant reduction or dismissal. The statistics spoke for themselves. And Lisa knew that this was just the beginning, because tomorrow she would be meeting with Hayes's lieutenant. And the folder in her briefcase, the one with all the evidence she'd gathered over the past 3 weeks, was about to become very relevant. The courthouse had mostly cleared out by the time Lisa finished her paperwork for the day. The clerk had left her a stack of files for tomorrow's docket, and the bailiff had gone home to his family. But Lisa remained in the judge's chambers, the folder from her briefcase now spread across the desk in front of her. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Lisa called. Lieutenant Frank Morrison entered, his uniform crisp and his expression serious. He was an older officer, someone Lisa had seen around headquarters but never worked with directly. He carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of experience. "Your Honor, thank you for seeing me," he said, taking the seat across from her desk. "Lieutenant Morrison, I assume you're here about Officer Hayes?" "I am." He pulled out a small notebook. "I've been watching the proceedings today, and I've been reviewing Hayes's citation records for the past several months. What I saw in that courtroom was troubling, to say the least." Lisa leaned back in her chair. 11 cases, 4 upheld with modifications, 3 reduced to warnings, and 4 dismissed entirely. That's a significant pattern of citations that don't hold up under scrutiny. "It's worse than that," Morrison said. "After today's session, I went back and pulled every citation Hayes has issued in the past year. The pattern you saw today isn't an anomaly. It's consistent. 83% of his citations are written to women, and of those, nearly 60% are to professional women during morning rush hour." The statistics hung in the air between them. Lisa opened her folder and slid it across the desk to Morrison. "I think you need to see this." Morrison opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. Complaint records, witness statements, the dashcam footage Jennifer had provided, Lisa's own detailed notes from her investigation. He took his time, reading through each page carefully. His expression grew darker with each document. "How long have you been investigating Hayes?" he asked finally. 3 weeks. Since he gave me that citation. Something about the encounter felt wrong, so I started digging. Every woman I talked to told me the same story. Condescending attitude, questionable traffic stops, deliberate delays that made them late for important obligations. And every single complaint filed against him was dismissed by his previous supervisor. Morrison closed the folder. His previous supervisor retired 6 months ago. I took over his cases when I transferred to this district. If I'd known about this pattern then, I would have started an investigation immediately. Why were the complaints dismissed? According to the files, his old supervisor believed Hayes was just being thorough, strict but fair. The complaints were seen as people trying to get out of legitimate tickets. Morrison shook his head. But looking at this now with all the context, it's clear something else was going on. Lisa stood and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. She could see Hayes's patrol car still sitting there. What happens now? I'm opening a formal internal affairs investigation as of tonight. Hayes will be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. I'll need to interview all the women in your folder, review every citation he's written, and examine his conduct reports. Morrison stood as well. I'll also need your official statement about your own encounter with him. You'll have it, Lisa promised. But I want to be clear about something. When my case goes before another judge, I want it handled fairly. If the evidence shows I actually ran that red light, then I'll accept the citation. This isn't about me getting out of a ticket. It's about making sure Hayes is held accountable for a pattern of behavior that's been ignored for too long. Understood, Your Honor. After Morrison left, Lisa sat alone in the chambers for a while longer. The weight of the day was finally catching up with her. She'd gone from defendant to judge in a matter of hours, and in the process, she'd potentially ended a police officer's PIC career. There was no satisfaction in that, only a sense that something that should have been done years ago was finally happening. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Kelly at the records department. I heard what happened in court today. The whole department is talking about it. You okay? Lisa smiled and typed back. I'm okay. Long day, but the right kind of long. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation into Officer Hayes moved forward quickly. Lieutenant Morrison was thorough, interviewing every woman who had filed a complaint. reviewing body camera footage that Hayes had conveniently forgotten to activate during several stops, and examining his citation patterns going back 3 years. The local news picked up the story after one of the women Lisa had interviewed decided to go public with her experience. The headline read, "Pattern of Bias? Police Officer Under Investigation After Judge's Review." The article was fair and factual, presenting both the allegations and the department's response. Hayes's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone in law enforcement knew who it was about. Lisa continued her work as a judge, handling case after case with the same careful attention to detail and fairness. She dismissed cases when the evidence didn't support them, upheld citations when they were legitimate, and always made sure that every person who came before her bench was treated with respect and given a fair hearing. Her own citation case was reassigned to Judge William Patterson, a veteran of the municipal court. Lisa appeared before him 3 weeks after her first day on the bench. The proceedings were brief. Judge Patterson reviewed the traffic camera footage from the intersection where Hayes had pulled her over, watched it 3 times from different angles, and then made his ruling. The evidence shows that the light was yellow when you entered the intersection. Judge Chen, Officer Hayes' citation was issued in error. Case dismissed. Lisa nodded, accepting the ruling without comment. It didn't feel like a victory. It just felt like the truth finally being recognized. The internal affairs investigation concluded 6 weeks after that day in court. The report was damning. Hayes had systematically targeted professional women, particularly those in expensive cars who appeared successful or confident. His citation reports consistently omitted relevant information that would have provided context for the violations. He had failed to activate his body camera during stops where complaints were later filed. And most significantly, he had been counseled multiple times by his previous supervisor about his attitude toward female drivers. But those counseling sessions had never resulted in formal discipline. The department's decision was swift. Officer Hayes was terminated from the police force. Several of the women he had cited were contacted and offered the opportunity to have their cases reviewed. The department also implemented new training protocols around implicit bias and proper documentation procedures. Lieutenant Morrison called Lisa with the news personally. "I wanted you to know that your investigation made this possible. Without the documentation you put together, without you taking the time to listen to those women, Hayes would still be out there." "I just did what any detective would do," Lisa said. "I followed the evidence. You did more than that. You used your position to make sure people were heard when they'd been ignored before. That matters." After hanging up, Lisa sat at her desk in the courthouse chambers. Through her window, she could see people walking up the steps to the building, coming to resolve their cases, to seek justice, to have their voices heard. Some would win their cases, some would lose, but every single one of them would be treated fairly. That was the promise of the courtroom, the promise she'd made when she put on the robe. Her first day as a judge hadn't gone anything like she'd expected. She'd walked into that courtroom as a defendant, frustrated and late, carrying the weight of an investigation she'd been conducting in secret. She'd left it as a judge who had helped expose a pattern of misconduct that had affected dozens of women over several years. The irony wasn't lost on her. Officer Hayes had pulled her over, thinking he was teaching a lesson about following the rules. He'd been dismissive and condescending, assuming that his badge gave him the authority to treat people however he wanted. He'd told her to learn to follow the rules like everyone else, but what Hayes had failed to understand was that the rules applied to everyone, including him, especially him. And now, from behind the bench, Lisa made sure that truth was upheld every single day. She closed her case files and prepared to head home. Tomorrow would bring a new docket, new cases, new people seeking justice. And she would be there, ready to listen, ready to examine the evidence, and ready to make sure that everyone who walked into her courtroom was treated with the dignity and fairness they deserved. Because that was what justice looked like. Not revenge, not vindication, but simply making sure the rules applied equally to everyone, even officers who thought they were above them. Even judges who had once been detectives running late for important meetings. Everyone.